Hoary-headed frosts fall in the fresh lap of the crimson rose. Well, those aren't my words. Those are the great bard of the Avon, William Shakespeare, one of his poems to spring and the environment and to the different seasons of the year. Hi, this is Will O'Toole for Park Ridge Sports, welcoming you to another edition. I figured this week I guess have turned the corner a little bit with the program. I'm wearing my alma mater's hoodie, the Seton Hall Pirates, although it doesn't look like they have any shot at going to the NCAA Big Dance, the March Madness, but there is looming for them. I shouldn't really say looming. There is hope that they do accept an invite to the NIT and really improve on this year, which at first nobody expected anything in the preseason way back in April or late May. And then as the season progressed, I think many of the pundits realized that Seton Hall had some talent on their team, and indeed they did. The only thing I can think of is that everything involved this year was so difficult. They just hit a wall. And, of course, Georgetown got hot at the right time, something I was hoping that Seton Hall would do. But alas, it wasn't to be. And the Pirates fell to the Hoyas in the semifinals. A really good game that night. One thing I can always say about Seton Hall, they make every game exciting, whether it's a blowout or a 2-point loss. They seem to manage to always make it exciting for me. And this year, as I said last week's on Park Ridge Sports, probably the beginning of the end for this NCAA March for the Pirates was the double-digit lead that they surrendered to Creighton at the Rock in Newark, where they gave up a 16-point lead and were basically just outshot, out-muscled, out-hustled by the Creighton Blue Jays, who have a really good team. I was surprised that they got blown out by the Hoyas. I just think that was a convergence of everything. They had some chaos. The Creighton Blue Jays had some controversy on the team for the last couple of weeks. Follow that with the fact that I have to tell you, Georgetown is coming of age. Now, I don't know what they're going to do in the tournament, but they're big, they're strong, they can shoot, they're going to be good. And my fear, of course, coming into this is why I wanted Seton Hall to make the NCAAs this year. They are going to be without the big Georgian, Sandro. I'm not even going to pronounce his name, but he reminds me of the 1970 Dodger third baseman, Billy Grabarkowitz. That I had no problem. And his nickname was Alphabet Soup. So Sandro, I'm not even going to go through it because it would just be such torture for me. But he has an Alphabet Soup last name. He is from the country of Georgia. He is going to be taking his talents to the NBA next year, along with a couple other Pirates. But what I didn't realize was that they are going to get Roden back. They are going to get their big center back. They are going to get a couple of recruits, although I think it's going to be another learning process. Who knows? Maybe Roden really steps up for the Pirates and averages 20 points a game next year. But I see the Pirates, unfortunately, taking a step down. I see Providence probably taking a step down. They got a great coach. UConn going up. If they can keep the kid boot camp, they should be a much, much better team. And, of course, they made the NCAAs. Creighton is going to be back. They are a little bit more senior-laden, but it just seems that they just reload as well. Villanova just reloads as well. So I can see the Pirate, and, of course, the Pirates beat a good St. John's team, much like Georgetown, coming of age and just maturing as the season got better and better. So it should be an interesting March tournament for the Big East. I am not putting a whole lot of stock in any of the teams that are going to be represented. More than likely, it's going to be Villanova, Creighton. Obviously, Georgetown got the automatic bid. And the other team in there is, I said Villanova, Creighton, and UConn. UConn. And actually, I got to be honest with you, the two best teams right now looking for the Big East are UConn, very talented team. But that Georgetown team, you got to give Ewing credit. Remember, half his team left the squad last year. And he started off the season. He did finish under 500 during the regular season and captures 4 straight wins, which is an accomplishment. I don't care what anyone says. It does goes to show you how equal or how balanced the Big East is. But the Hoyas, are just getting better. Now, I'm not saying they won't be picked off in an 11-12 game, but they could surprise. And their future is very bright. I mean, they were just big, and they really matched up well against the Pirates, who had the 3rd largest team or tallest team in the NCAA this year. And but they really matched up well. Pirates still need to work on outside shooting. They need to work on outside defense, and they need to avoid those long slumps. I'm not talking where, they get blitzed on an 8-0 run. I'm talking about in many of their losses where they couldn't score for 8-10 minutes. You're talking about a quarter of the game that you can't score, and they couldn't even get to the foul line. And that was one of their struggles late in the season. They couldn't get to the foul line. So I'm wearing my Seton Hall colors of blue and white. Rutgers looks like they are going, albeit they like Seton Hall, kind of hit a wall, but at least they're getting there. And their future is really bright. Got a couple of stars from the Bergen County area, and they look to improve in the probably right now the strongest conference in college basketball, and that's the Big Ten, because it looks like they're going to be sending about 7 or 8 teams to the Big Dance. Follow that with maybe the Big 12. And that's where I really wanted to go for the first half, because the other thing I wanted to talk about was this. And I had said this already. I was hoping that the NCAA, rather than I never even thought they were going to have the Big East tournament. I'd even said on an earlier episode, probably back in February, that I was thinking that they weren't going to have the tournament and then they would just go from there. I was really surprised. I was glad they had the tournament, because it's so much fun to come home from work and have games on all day. I think people really appreciate that, and then realize that, wow, I'm being spoiled by all these NCAA basketball games in the afternoon. And then I get to look forward to that next Thursday and Friday with the NCAA tournament. So it was great that they had the Big East tournament. I love it. And I was glad that most of the conferences held their tournaments. I know that they had some teams have to fall out. Duke and Virginia had to fall out from their tournament because of COVID. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. And that situation this year, over the last year, led me to this. And I was just doing a little study, and I thought about this, and please don't kill me on my math. I'm not the accountant mathematician that my brother Jim or his sons are, or even my son Matt. But I was looking at all the conferences, and there was a total of about 356 teams total. And that's if you count the Ivy Leagues. And really what I thought they were going to do. And here's another issue I didn't realize, that the NIT is going to have a tournament, albeit it's only going to be 16 members in there. Interesting thing, kind of like the Army situation, where Army was committed to a bowl game, if you guys remember listening out on a previous show, and then all of a sudden they couldn't get a team to play them, an opponent. So Army was put kind of on the shelf, but they told Army, look, if somebody bows out, you'll go to the bowl game. And sure enough, it actually worked out well. Even though they lost to West Virginia, it was probably one of the best games played, and they got to play on New Year's Eve. And I had said it would have been great if they played on New Year's Day, the military academies, in that crazy COVID year that we had. Well, almost as good. They played on New Year's Day, New Year's Eve, and it was quite it was a really good game. Anyway, I'm thinking the same thing with the March Madness. I was actually hoping that they would just say, you know what, play out the season, get your experience, get your games in, as many as you can. If you have to shut down, at least everybody is going to participate in the tournament. Now, you can actually say this. that the conference tournaments are really a pre-March Madness tournament. They are, but it would have been kind of cool and a great experiment by the NCAA. Although let me just say this, I love the NIT, so it would probably go away as we know it if the NCAA ever adopted this. I'd love to see the NCAA just say, you know what, everybody makes the tournament. Now, you'd say, all right, well, what's the sense of the regular season? Well, here's the deal. I've figured out, and again, I'm not the best with the accounting, but I basically said there's about 356 teams. So let's just say 360 Division I teams. It really is, if you got it down to 256 from, let's say, that 360, it only means one more game for the team that goes all the way to the Final Four. Or it's basically one more game to what is already being played with the 68, or what they started in 85 with 64. Anyway, hear me out on this. You get your 350 some odd teams. Those teams, I want to get it to 256. So those teams would do just like they have with the additional 4 teams in the tournament. Those 68 pare it down to 64, and then they go from there. Everybody's single elimination. And you could do this in a variety of ways. You could just rank them by strength of schedule and however they do with all those formulas. Just go 1 through 356. And let's say the last 120, I think I had it as the last 176 teams, all right, have a play-in game. And then that gets you to, let's say, 256. And then 256, all right, down to 128. Excuse me, it's an extra 2 games. Down to 128, down to 64, down to 32, down to 16, down to 8, down to 4, down to 2. So really, the champion, if he doesn't play the play-in game, plays one more weekend. 8 games total. But really, when you think about it, it would have eliminated the conference tournaments. And I don't believe anybody was making true money this year simply because they couldn't really sell tickets. And I know that I am sure that the TV revenue was down. Maybe adding and just saying, look, we're ending the season March 3rd. We're going to rank all the teams and we'll seed them. And then those 176 teams will play, 86 games or whatever, or 88 games. And then that'll get us down to 256, and then away we go. So this week technically would have been the first weekend of March Madness. It would have been kind of cool. And I think it would have given shots to, teams like, again, I'm being prejudiced, the Armies who are eliminated, or a Colgate, or think about other teams who have never gotten to the big dance. Now at least they can say, we got there once. And then the NCAA could really experiment with this and then really, truly call it March Madness, because it would take place. Now, I don't know whether the big power conference schools would ever go for this. They probably do love their conference tournaments. I know that the Big East, really, it's become, outside of what used to be when I was growing up, the Christmas tournament at the Garden, this and the NIT when I was growing up in the 70s, and we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. This tournament, the Big East tournament, really does. It's a great marketing tool for the Big East Conference. And in fact, if Madison Square Garden wasn't such a great venue for basketball, why did the Big Ten? Why are other teams or other conferences like the Big Ten clamoring to have tournaments here? I mean, the Big Ten a couple of years ago had it in Brooklyn where the Nets play, with an eye on maybe getting their games at Madison Square Garden. So without a doubt, Madison Square Garden is the mecca for college basketball. And the irony of it is that really the college basketball, we've had spurts where it's been very popular, but for the most part, college sports are not as popular as the pro sports in the Northeast. And I think we can understand why. The dominance of Boston, Philly, and New York as professional venues. It's just incredibly hard for, let's say, a college sport or a college team to really make their way in. It's happened on occasion, but for the most part, and that's what makes this Big East tournament so special, is that here it is for this whole weekend. Nobody's talking anything but really the Big East tournament. So it's great. And how do we get to the big dance? And are we on the bubble? Or what seating are we going to have? And all the rest of it. But I was even thinking there is about, I thought of even breaking it down and making it almost a regional thing. But the problem with that is that you could probably consider the Northeast, interestingly enough, probably has the most conferences if you break it down. And why not? It has probably the most schools, largest population, even over, let's say, the South and maybe the Pacific Coast. But here's how I had it. Let's just say this. Instead of doing the one through 356, you rank them that way. Maybe you do it almost where you square the teams off by region. So I was just throwing this out. I mean, the Ivy League is not playing at all this year, so they would be totally shut out. So you would have, let's say, with the Big East, you would probably rank them as the number one conference, and I would situate maybe the Atlantic 10 as the second dominant conference, let's say, in the East. And then I would put the Northeast Conference, the Patriot, the Colonial, the MAC, and maybe America East. Now, this has, as opposed to, let's say, the PAC or the Pacific region, you have the Pac-12, you have the Mountain West, the Big Sky, the Big West, and the Western Conference, Western Coast Conference. So you can even play with this and say, you know what, the Colonial has many Southern teams. We could situate them maybe in the South, because the South only has 5 teams, and then we could take maybe one South conference team. I have like the Sun Belt there, move them maybe to the Midwest or to the Big 12 region, whatever. It would kind of regionalize and maybe save a little money in terms of travel and be kind of fun, because then let's just say, you could even have, let's say, the champion of the region go on. I don't, as I'm thinking about it, I think this might be too cumbersome. And I really think that, just ranking all the teams from 1 through 300 and some odd, 350, and then getting that down to, let's say, a workable 256. And as I said, it's just an added 2 games, no big deal. For most teams, as I stated, if you get to a conference championship like Georgetown did, they had to play 4 games on 4 continuous nights. Here you're playing on 4 separate weekends, 8 games. So it's just 2 extra games. So it should be interesting. Am I going to give you any predictions? Well, you'd have to say Gonzaga and Baylor. I know that Baylor lost 2 late season games, and they didn't win their conference, obviously. And I know that many pundits are all over Oklahoma State as they're coming in. So probably keep your eye on that. I didn't do a study on it. It would be interesting. I can't remember, and I know this is going to be, it's just going to be a major point for the pundits. Apologize. I was just thinking about Duke and Kentucky not being in the tournament. Now, Duke, probably, if they said, look, we're okay, they'll probably be put in. And we know why. Good club, lots of talent, big marketing. They're a big TV ratings college, yada, yada, yada. But it is interesting that the last time that Duke and Kentucky probably weren't in the tournament, if I can recall, maybe about like 19 together, maybe about 1960. You have to go all the way back to 67, maybe 63, because Adolph Rupp did have some great teams at Kentucky with the Wildcats. I know that I'm just thinking maybe early 60s, but they will make that a bone of contention, that the fact that Duke and Kentucky aren't in the tournament for the first time in decades. And so it just goes to show you what a wild year it is. And if anyone saw the late scores, the number of upsets in, let's say, these conferences that nobody talks about, I have to be honest. Seton Hall probably would have had to have won the entire Big East Conference tournament to be even considered, because all of the upsets, all that they have done is put the teams from the bigger conference who are on the bubble, the Ole Misses and the Xaviers, further and further away from getting entry into the tournament. And for the Big East, with Georgetown winning at 12-12, as I said, they're a team that's maturing. It probably hurt Xavier the most, because Xavier probably would have gotten one of those spots as the Final Four in. With Georgetown in, you cannot consider Xavier. It's going to take quite a bit of politics to get the Xavier Musketeers, one of the best names. And I always wanted them to put the X-Men across their jersey, kind of like out of respect for the Marvel characters. It would be kind of cool as well. So a double entendre name there. But tons of upsets in the conferences that nobody has ever heard of. I'm talking about the WAC, with the Western Athletic Conference. The WAC was something different years ago. I'm talking, let's just say, I'm just pulling these names out, the Summit, the Horizon. Here's one that I didn't even realize, that Robert Morris moved from the Northeast Conference. They are now, I believe, in the Colonial Conference this year. So lots of teams trying to move up and improve themselves. I know, obviously, people knew this. Wichita State, which did make the tournament, they left the Missouri Valley and joined the American East Conference, the one that UConn left. So it's going to be interesting. College basketball and college football, I've been saying this for a while, is not done with all of these conference realignments. I really think that you may just see conferences losing memberships of teams that latched on, and those teams will go back to the ones where they were or to the conferences where they may have been the most comfortable, where they were winning with more consistency. I'm thinking about, maybe I'm being crazy. Maybe it's all the money. And I've always said this. It's great that the schools are making all this money by going from the Big East, like I'm going to give you, Boston College, and joining the ACC. And you can say, well, they're making a pile of money by joining the more well-known, the bigger impact conference. But really, their basketball team has been in the doldrums. They fired the coach in mid-season this year. Their football team is perennially 5-6 or 6-5, depending on whether they can beat Toledo in one of those early games so they can go to a bowl game. And it's not just, and to me, if I'm an alumnus of that school, I'm saying, okay, the school's making a pile of cash for what? They haven't improved athletically. You got to remember this, and I'm being very, very partisan here. When BC, they were really, people don't realize this, before they joined the ACC back, now you're talking about 15, 16 years ago. It's just amazing. But they played on a Thursday night against Virginia Tech football with Matt Ryan at the helm. And I believe they were ranked number 2 and had a chance to go to number 1. Now, things change. I get all that. But that team, and maybe BC, you could argue, was on the precipice of being a major player in their conference, which would have been the Big East. And you don't know what that would have done had they not left for the ACC. Now the ACC, boy, oh boy, it looks like a shopping list of teams. It looks like what the Big East was trying to do with the basketball conference when they had like 16, 18 teams spread all over the place. The ACC is the same way. And by the way, here's why Johnny can't add, because I've done this. The Big 12 has 10 teams. The Big 10 has 14 teams. Can someone figure that out other than marketing? But I just laugh at that. The Big 10, yes, they're never going to get rid of the logo. They're never going to get rid of the trademark and stuff. They have 14 teams. No wonder kids can't add today, right? This is the big complaint. No wonder. I mean, when we have our adults running these colleges, they can't get the right number of memberships of their schools. 14 teams, and they call themselves the Big Ten. But just getting back to the basketball, I actually believe this. I don't think the Big East is done really expanding because remember, they have an odd number of teams right now. And they do have Creighton, and they do have, let's say, Marquette on kind of like the outer fringes, right? So you have Xavier, Butler, okay, kind of together. Then you go to Marquette, all right, still somewhat together in that, and DePaul in that northern Great Lakes region. But then you got to go all the way out to Omaha. And I've often said this. If Gonzaga doesn't win a national championship coming out of the conference, and they have a very good chance this year, unbeaten, they could be doing winning a championship as an undefeated team, the first team to do that since the Hoosiers of 75, 76 with Bobby Knight. Who's to say, because it's so crazy, the geography, that maybe Gonzaga says, you know what, maybe you should join the Big East. Now you'd have 12 teams. And I've made this as a bone of contention. And of course, it's going against what I'm saying. Now the league is becoming too cumbersome. And of course, they're named Big East. Who's to say, though, that the Big East then, and this is just theory, they add Gonzaga, maybe they add St. Mary's, or maybe they add BYU, and then get one other team, maybe a St. Louis. I don't think they would add Dayton because I think that Xavier would put up a struggle there or a fight. That would be one interesting conference. And why would that benefit Gonzaga? Yeah, they would have to do, and so would the Big East teams on the East Coast. Would be a lot of traveling, but just think what that would open up for Gonzaga. Just like Creighton has become really a top 20 contender every year since they've joined the Big East. They have become a major player, and I think it is playing under the cameras, under the TV ratings of the Big East. Because even today, Gonzaga had a game earlier this year that was canceled because of COVID against Baylor. People don't realize that. That was in early December. When have you really seen Gonzaga on national TV during the regular season? They joined the Big East. And at least for Bergen County residents, they're on Fox Channel 5 or Fox Sports 83. And their brand would be even bigger because now you're playing St. John's, New York, Seton Hall, New York metropolitan area, Connecticut, New York metropolitan area, Georgetown, the Washington, D.C. area, Villanova, the Philadelphia area, and of course DePaul, Chicago. I don't think it's as crazy. Listen, I say a lot of crazy things. But remember, as I say every week, this is us talking in a bar, one-to-one. We're having a beer, a hamburger, and just sitting talking everything sports. It's really not inconceivable that Gonzaga would be offered maybe an invite. It would balance the schedule. And as I said, it would make maybe traveling out to the West Coast or traveling out west. Because remember, Omaha is in Omaha and DePaul and Marquette, they're in a separate time zone. And really that Omaha one is really fast approaching Mountain. You stick a BYU and a Gonzaga, now you could actually conceivably make this as a road trip. You go to BYU Gonzaga if you're Seton Hall. BYU comes here and they play Seton Hall and St. John's and goes home for a weekend. Same thing with Gonzaga. But here's the thing with Gonzaga. You'd be playing in New York twice a year as part of your conference. Not against St. Mary's in Northern California, late night TV, but New York. And those are instant, big-time credentials, New York City, media market. And with Seton Hall being kind of a power the last 4 or 5 years, at least in the Big East, one of the big dogs, St. John's maybe ascending, and hopefully Seton Hall stays there. It wouldn't be a bad move by Gonzaga. I just laugh because Look, at a conference games, look at where some of these teams travel to. And at a conference, many of these teams go to Hawaii or they've gone to Alaska. So, I mean, traveling cross country in the contiguous United States is really not all that bad. Not as arduous as maybe going to those two states, or they go to Puerto Rico or the Bahamas or whatever. So I'm just saying it's big. It's it's just a big theory by me. But I will tell you this: it's going to be interesting if Gonzaga gets bumped off this year in the tournament. And let's say they get beat in the 16. Are they going to say, look, we have the talent and we have the experience. Why are we missing that last component of winning the national championship and at least getting to the Final Four? And maybe it's night in, night out, playing teams that are as good as you, or maybe not as good as you, but, could easily beat you night in, night out. So it should be fun. Anyway, I did want to do some fun in the last 15 minutes. I think I'm going to save this and I'll do more study on it. I saw YouTube the other day and I saw this interview there was a Mount Rushmore of contemporary players, and the 4 players that were seen as the greatest of all time who are still alive. And of course, this was obviously Henry Aaron just passed away. So obviously, Henry Aaron was part of this Mount Rushmore. It was also Willie Mays. The 2 guys I thought was kind of interesting, they had Johnny Bench and Sandy Koufax. I thought that was kind of interesting. Now, they had those 4 guys around. It was MLB Network. I saw it on YouTube. It was really, really interesting. I got some nuggets of information that I didn't know. Quite a bit of respect. Do you realize at that table there was over 1,300, 1,700 home runs at that table? Oh, I forgot the 2 that Koufax hit in his career. One supposedly against, he had said Warren Spahn. So they were talking, interestingly enough, and they showed a caption of Johnny Bench throwing out a runner at the All-Star game. And of course, yes, Mays and Aaron were marveling over not just Bench's incredible throwing ability, but also his laser-like throws to second. Everyone on a line to the same spot. Well, what did they show? They showed the 1970 clip of him gunning down a player at second base. So I did a little bit of course, it piqued my interest. All of a sudden, I said, wait a minute, that game was at Riverfront. Bench was the starting catcher playing in his home park, and he guns down a guy at second base. So I started doing some research, went all the way back to 33. I did go to 2020. Unfortunately, I was just doing it while I was watching it, so I wasn't marking it down. But interestingly enough, and I'll get into this later, I discovered this. There are only 2 catchers in All-Star history who threw out a runner on base in his home park. The first in NL history was Johnny Bench, and I'll get into that in a second. And of course, as I'm going through this, I'm saying, oh, wow, I have a real nugget of trivia. I mean, really crazy trivia, but it's just a fun little thing. Of course, I'm going 1930, 34, 35. It's interesting. There wasn't a lot of caught stealing, weren't a lot of stolen bases in baseball's first 20, 25 years. Again, that was how the game was being played. From the All-Star game, 33, and I'm going all the way up to about 1960, 65, and then the game kind of changes with more stolen bases, even in the All-Star game, and obviously more caught stealing. Make a long story short, Bench is the first in the National League to do it, and I was like, all right, I got this nugget of information. Well, it was dashed real quick by one of the greatest players of all time, Yogi Berra. Ready for this? In 1960, and of course, I'm going to say this, Berra had to get 2 games to do it in because the All-Star game from 60 to about 62 or 58 to 62, they had 2 All-Star games. I think that was a major mistake by baseball. But regardless, they played 2 games. Well, in the first game held at Cleveland, Berra doesn't do it. Or it's just reversed. But Berra picks off at home plate. From a throw by Whitey Ford, he picks off no less than Willie Mays, who had stolen third in the first inning and then was picked off at home. And what I mean is this: he wasn't thrown out at the plate. I was looking through the baseball reference. Berra gets the ball and he gets nailed at third base. But wild. And then I'm looking. Yankee Stadium, a Yankee pitcher starting first inning, typical Berra, and he picks off a former New York Giant, San Francisco great, and one of these guys that was on this episode. So then I'm looking, and I look, and here's Bench, and here's Aaron. Bench, obviously, this is 1969 because that's his Topps All-Star trophy, rookie trophy, and of course the great Henry Aaron. This was one of the cards I didn't show you on my special episode for Henry Aaron. So then I'm looking, and what's great is this. Ready for this? Bench is the first National League catcher to do it. He does it at Riverfront. First All-Star game played in Cincinnati in about 13 years. First one at Riverfront. And he picks off Tommy Harper of the Milwaukee Brewers. And the pitcher on the mound, I never even realized this. So even I am constantly learning when I do the research, and I think that's why I love it. The guy on the mound was none other than Jim Merritt, who wins 20 that year and is never the same because his arm, he has arm problems after that. He actually won 20 games that year for the Cincinnati Reds in their pennant-winning season at Riverfront. But here's the deal. Bench picks off. Ready? This is the fun part. Bench picks off it went Merritt to Bench. They pick off, and I'm going to give you his first picture, Tommy Harper. Now, this is a Pilot, 1969 Seattle Pilots baseball card. At the time, this is 1970, he's playing for the Milwaukee Brewers. But I had to say this. Ready? He's a former Red. That's a great picture. All right. So at least Bench, in my mind, one up Berra. Yeah, he picked off a former New Yorker, but he was never a teammate. And even though Bench was never a teammate, I do not believe with Harper. At least they were both former, or one was a former Cincinnati Red. So just some fun. All right. I will go into that in more detail as the baseball season comes. We are fast approaching the baseball season. But you know what? As I go, I was doing some other stuff, and I figured I would just put these things up. I was doing some basketball, March Madness, as I remember. Probably the first year I ever remember basketball and watching it on TV. Remember, back then, you got to see maybe a selected few of Saturday games. That was all they showed that I can recall back in 70. My first game that I ever saw at Madison Square Garden, my cousin Timmy played actually for Georgetown, the late 60s and 1970. And he got us tickets. It was great. I just remember because I was going to the game. I had a book report that was due the next day, and I forgot all about it. Unfortunately, Georgetown played a doubleheader at the Garden. They played Manhattan and lost by a couple of points to the Manhattan Jaspers. But that Georgetown team went to the NIT, and they managed to play this man down here, first round game. And it is, I know it's a bad picture. I apologize. Ready for this? They played LSU and Pete Maravich. Now, what I always tell my friends, my cousin held Pete Maravich, who averaged over 44 points a game. He held him to 2 points. Unfortunately, Maravich scored 42 against the rest of the Georgetown team, and Georgetown lost by a point to LSU. Didn't matter because LSU lost in the next round. It was amazing. He's probably one of the greatest passers outside of maybe Bird and Magic Johnson that I saw on the college level. And yet his teams, he was just too far ahead, too advanced of the rest of his teammates. LSU was like 14-13 every year, maybe 16-12. They just, the rest of the team just couldn't operate on the same cylinders that Pete Maravich. I always liked him. If people remember, he graces the cover. I'll get that maybe for next week. He graces the cover of Sports Illustrated. Remember the old floppy socks that the guys wore? But he was one of my first memories. And of course, other guys that I remember, I was doing this. I do remember the Austin Carr game. It was a Saturday afternoon game. It was the first round of the tournament. Now, for those who are big Irish fans, Notre Dame fans, 1970, Johnny D was the coach of the Fighting Irish a couple of years before Digger takes the reins and really makes the Irish into a national power. But Austin Carr reminds me so much of a guy who would follow him, and I believe Carr was from D.C., a kid named Adrian Dantley. Both the same type of players, 6'4", about 220. They looked and were built like fullbacks. I said this. But I was looking at, and of course that's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, a.k.a. Lou Alcindor, from probably the best card collection of all time for basketball. That's the 1970 edition. They were very long, very thick cardboard. They're probably one of the best sets you can own. But anyway, Carr, he just went crazy in the game. He scored 61 points. So then I went back and was looking at his stats for Notre Dame. Carr averaged over 40 some odd points a game. He played like 6 or 7 NCAA tournament games. It didn't really help the Irish. They would always win the first round game and then get beat. But against Ohio University, who's in the tournament this year, as a matter of fact, he had 61. Then I was looking against TCU. I think he had 57 in another tournament. And this was how crazy it was. They used to play a third place game if you got beat in the regionals. But Austin Carr, I'd like to, we'll take a little bit longer at some of these great NBA players who had great NCAA tournaments that I recall as a kid. Hey, this is Will O'Toole for Park Ridge Sports. I thank you again for following along on Everything Sports, and I'll be here next week. Thank you.